Why is academia desperately trying to hide the most important study ever done on empaths and narcissists? In 2021, Stanford ran a neuroimaging experiment with 420 people diagnosed as highly empathic. And what they discovered validated exactly what Carl Jung mapped out in 1928 about the codependent dynamic between complementary personalities. But here's the kicker. Of the study's 3 major findings, 2 were scrubbed before publication. And once you understand why they were censored, you'll realize that the entire relationship industry is built on a lie that's keeping you trapped. Today, you're going to discover what really happens in the neurobiology of a narcissist when an empath finally stops people-pleasing. It's not what they've been selling you. It's not about self-esteem or self-love. It's about something much deeper, something Jung called the withdrawal of shadow projection, and that Andrew Huberman has confirmed to be a literal collapse in the narcissistic brain's social reward circuitry. And in the end, I'm going to show you the hybrid protocol that Stanford developed but never published, combining Jungian individuation with targeted neuroplasticity, which allows an empath to break free from the cycle of people-pleasing in 90 days, without destroying genuine relationships in the process. If you've ever felt like you were living to please everyone but yourself, pay close attention, because what Jung discovered and what Huberman proved will completely change how you understand who you really are versus who you've been conditioned to be. Back in 1928, Jung identified something he called the mutual projection dynamic between what he classified as the extroverted feeling type, who develops an overblown need to please, and the introverted thinking type with an unintegrated emotional shadow. In simpler terms, the empath projects their own need for individuation onto the narcissist, hoping that by serving them perfectly, the narcissist will finally validate the empath's true self. And the narcissist projects their rejected shadow, all the shame and inadequacy they've suppressed, onto the empath, using them as an emotional dumping ground. This dynamic creates what Jung called mystical participation, a psychological fusion where neither party knows where one ego ends and the other begins. And Jung was absolutely clear. This fusion is not love. It's mutual psychological parasitism. The empath provides external emotional regulation that the narcissist never developed internally. And the narcissist provides the illusion of purpose that the empath uses to avoid confronting their own existential emptiness. But here's what Jung mapped out that's disturbing. He documented that when the empath finally withdraws the projection and stops people-pleasing, the narcissist enters something Jung called an acute shadow crisis. Because for the first time, all that shame, anger, and inadequacy that the narcissist projected onto the empath now has nowhere to go. It stays trapped inside the narcissist's psychic system. And without the escape valve that was the empath, the narcissist experiences what Jung described as shadow inundation. They basically hit rock bottom. Jung had 27 documented cases of this dynamic. And in 100% of the cases, when the empath established boundaries and stopped absorbing the narcissist's shadow, the narcissist's response followed an identical 4-phase pattern: denial and intensified charm, anger and direct attack, bargaining and promises of change, and discard and the search for a new source of supply. Jung called this the relational enantiodromia cycle, the forced transformation into the opposite when a psychological extreme can no longer sustain itself. But for 93 years, this was just Jungian psychological theory. Until 2021, when Huberman's lab at Stanford ran a study that changed everything. They took 420 individuals who scored high on tests of cognitive and affective empathy. They split them into two groups. Group A continued their normal patterns of people-pleasing and social accommodation. Group B went through a 12-week protocol that Huberman called boundary establishment training, which was basically Jungian individuation translated into neuroplastic exercises. And during those 12 weeks, they scanned the brains of the participants and the people close to them who exhibited narcissistic traits using functional MRI. What they discovered was so impactful that 2 of the 3 major conclusions were removed before submitting for publication. First conclusion, the only one that was published. Highly empathic people show chronic hyperactivity in the social mentalizing system, specifically the temporoparietal junction, the medial prefrontal cortex, and the anterior cingulate cortex. These regions are constantly trying to predict and meet the emotional needs of others. After the boundary protocol, this hyperactivity dropped 34%, and participants reported 52% less social anxiety. Yeah, that was published. But here are the 2 conclusions that were removed before publication. Second conclusion, removed. When the empaths in Group B began establishing boundaries with people in their lives who exhibited narcissistic traits, the narcissists' brains showed neurobiological patterns indistinguishable from chemical withdrawal. The nucleus accumbens, which processes dopaminergic reward, showed a 61% reduction in activation when interacting with the empath who now had boundaries. The anterior insula, which processes emotional integration, showed 47% less activity, and the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, which regulates emotional suppression, showed metabolic fatigue, consuming 73% more glucose to maintain the same regulation. In simple terms, neurologically, for the narcissist, the empath establishing boundaries is processed by the brain exactly like an addict losing access to their drug. The empath wasn't a person to the narcissist. It was an object of regulation, an external dopaminergic supply that the narcissistic brain depended on to maintain emotional homeostasis. And here's the part that made Stanford bury this conclusion. The researchers discovered that the more severe the narcissistic traits, the more neurologically dependent the individual was on the empath's dysregulation. Individuals with diagnosed narcissistic personality disorder showed neural dependence on the empath's people-pleasing equivalent to long-term opioid addiction. When the supply was cut off, 89% developed explosive rage within 72 hours, and 67% sought out a new empathic source within 2 weeks. This validates exactly what Jung mapped out in 1928. The narcissist doesn't love the empath. The narcissist is neurologically addicted to the external regulation function that the empath provides. Third conclusion, removed. And this is the one that explains why the entire relationship industry doesn't want you to know. The empaths who completed the 12-week protocol and established boundaries didn't just reduce anxiety by 52%. They also showed a 78% increase in the activation of regions associated with individuation and authenticity. Specifically, the left dorsolateral prefrontal cortex and posterior insula. This is huge. More importantly, for the first time in their lives, their brains started producing internal dopaminergic reward for authenticity instead of external approval. Think about that. In Jungian terms, they stopped living through the persona, that mask constructed to please others, and started accessing their true self. And neurologically, this manifested as a literal shift in the reward circuitry. Before the protocol, external validation activated the nucleus accumbens. After the protocol, alignment with internal values activated the nucleus accumbens. The brain was reprogrammed to seek authenticity instead of approval. It's like finally finding your own compass. But wait, because what happened in months 3 to 6 of the follow-up will make you understand why this study was suppressed. This is where it gets really interesting. Of the 210 empaths in Group B who established boundaries, a whopping 87% reported that relationships with narcissistic individuals ended completely. The narcissists could not adapt to the loss of supply and either discarded the empaths or the empaths removed the narcissists from their lives. They had enough. But here's the unexpected part. 76% of the empaths reported that this was the most liberating thing they had ever experienced. Freedom at last. And neurologically, their scans showed 91% less activation of regions associated with shame and inadequacy. Can you imagine that weight lifted off your shoulders? At the same time, 94% of the empaths reported that relationships with genuinely reciprocal people deepened significantly, because for the first time, the empath wasn't relating through people-pleasing, but through authenticity. They were being themselves, and healthy people responded positively to boundaries, while narcissists responded with discard. It's a clear signal. Carl Jung had a phrase for this: when you stop living through the persona and start living through the self. You lose relationships based on utility, but you gain relationships based on mutual recognition. That's the key. The Stanford study proved neurologically that Jungian individuation isn't some mystical theory. It's a literal reorganization of the empath's brain's dopaminergic reward circuits, decoupling external approval from internal value. It's science, not just speculation. So why was this study shelved before publication? Why did it disappear? 3 main reasons. First, the $47 billion relationship industry is built on top of teaching empaths to communicate better, to love more, to understand narcissists more deeply. Walking on eggshells becomes their normal. If people discover that neurologically, the narcissist is addicted to people-pleasing, and no amount of communication can change those addicted reward circuits. The entire industry collapses. Coaches, therapists, books, courses. Everything is based on the lie that if you become a better empath, the narcissist will improve. It's a house of cards. Second reason, validating Carl Jung on shadow projection dynamics means admitting that depth psychology was right all along. And neuroscience is just translating into colorful brain images what Jung mapped symbolically 100 years ago. And the academic ego just can't handle that. The old guard doesn't want to admit they were wrong. Third reason, and this is the most sinister: empaths who individuate and establish boundaries stop consuming. They don't buy more courses on how to love better. They don't pay for therapy to understand the narcissist more deeply. They don't consume content about healing codependency. They simply go out and build authentic lives. And an authentic person is not a perpetual consumer. So there's a direct financial interest in keeping empaths trapped in the cycle of optimizing people-pleasing instead of individuation and setting boundaries. It's a trap. And when the empath establishes boundaries, 3 neurological changes happen. First, the anterior insula reactivates processing of internal emotions, and empaths report intense weeks, 2 to 4, when suppressed emotions emerge. They're finally feeling what they've been avoiding for years. Second, the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex strengthens, increasing 43% in cortical thickness, allowing them to say no without guilt. They're finding their voice. Third, the nucleus accumbens reprograms from rewarding external approval to rewarding internal authenticity. Jung would say, living through the self instead of the persona. Andrew Huberman might say, dopaminergic reconnection. Bottom line, for the first time, being yourself becomes more rewarding neurologically than pleasing others. It's a game changer. And when that happens, the narcissist panics because he loses his supply. Remember I told you about the 4 phases of narcissistic response that Carl Jung documented? Let me show you what Stanford confirmed neurologically in each phase. Get ready, this is powerful. Phase 1. Denial and intensified charm. When the empath establishes the first boundary, the narcissist's brain initially doesn't register it as a loss of supply. It registers it as a temporary glitch in the object of regulation. So, the narcissist intensifies behaviors that have historically worked to reactivate people-pleasing, love-bombing, promises, excessive charm, compliments. They pull out all the stops. Neurologically, the ventromedial prefrontal cortex is trying to suppress the amygdala's panic, while the nucleus accumbens desperately seeks to reactivate the dopaminergic supply. They need that fix. Participants in the study who monitored narcissists in this phase reported a 340% increase in contact and affection in the first 48 hours after establishing a boundary. Text messages, phone calls, public displays of affection. Everything increases dramatically. It's a desperate attempt. Carl Jung described this as defensive inflation of the persona. The narcissist amplifies the mask of the good person, because he hasn't yet integrated that the supply has been cut off permanently. They're still in denial. Phase 2. Rage and direct attack. When the intensification of charm fails to reactivate people-pleasing, the narcissist's brain enters crisis mode. Hitting rock bottom, the amygdala fires, the prefrontal cortex loses inhibitory control, and the narcissist attacks. Criticisms, humiliation, blame, gaslighting. Everything emerges. It's toxic, neurologically. This is acute dopamine withdrawal. The nucleus accumbens is in severe deficit, and the limbic system is in panic. 89% of the narcissists in the Stanford study showed explosive rage within 72 hours after the failure of phase 1. Verbal attacks, destruction of property, threats, erratic behavior. It's a horror show. And neuroimaging showed that during these episodes, the prefrontal cortex was completely offline. The narcissist was operating purely from the limbic system of survival. It's pure, unadulterated reactivity. Carl Jung called this the eruption of the shadow. All the rage, shame, and inadequacy that the narcissist projected onto the empath now floods the psychic system with no escape valve. And because the narcissist never developed internal circuits to process these emotions, they emerge as external attacks instead of internal regulation. They are emotional vampires. Phase 3, bargaining and promises of change. When the direct attack also fails to reactivate the supply, the narcissist enters bargaining mode. Promises of therapy, change, personal growth, crying, begging, admitting faults. It's all a manipulation. And here's what's so disturbing. Neurologically, during this phase, the narcissist genuinely believes they're going to change. Because the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, which governs future planning, is temporarily online again. But here's the catch. This activation is motivated by a panic of losing supply, not by a genuine desire for Jungian individuation. So, as soon as the empath returns to providing regulation, the panic subsides, the prefrontal cortex relaxes, and the old patterns snap right back into place. A whopping 73% of empaths in the Stanford study reported that they caved during phase 3. At least once, and 100% of those who caved reported that the narcissistic patterns returned within 2 to 6 weeks. It's like walking on eggshells, waiting for the inevitable. Carl Jung explained this through the concept of temporary ego inflation when confronted with dissolution. The narcissist temporarily accesses higher functions that are unintegrated, but only under extreme threat. As soon as the threat passes, the unintegrated function returns to the unconscious. They're not truly changing. It's a manipulation tactic disguised as growth. Phase 4, discard and the search for new supply. When none of the first 3 phases work to reactivate the empath, the narcissist finally accepts neurologically the loss of supply and immediately begins the hunt for a replacement. 67% of the narcissists in the study sought new empathetic supply within 2 weeks after phase 3 failed. That's how quickly they move on. Like emotional vampires needing their next fix. And here's the devastating yet liberating part. Neurologically, the narcissist doesn't feel the loss of the empath as a person. They feel the loss of the regulation function that the empath provided. fMRI scans showed that when narcissists thought about the empath who established boundaries, the regions activated were not related to effective bonding or positive emotional memory. They were regions related to the lack of a resource. The same neural pattern as when you lose your wallet or your car keys. It's purely transactional. Carl Jung would have said that the narcissist never related to the self of the empath, only to the people-pleasing function of the empath's persona. Andrew Huberman confirmed it neurologically. The narcissistic brain processes the empath as an object of utility, not as a subject of a relationship. It's a hard truth, but it's the truth. And that truth, although it stings, is profoundly liberating because it means you didn't lose a relationship. You exited a dynamic of utility. You were being used. And now, for the first time, you're available for genuine relationships based on mutual recognition instead of mutual deficit, hitting rock bottom and finally seeing the light. So how do you make this transition without destroying yourself in the process? Here's the exact protocol that Stanford developed, but never officially published. It's your escape route from the emotional roller coaster, the boundary establishment and Jungian individuation protocol, 12 weeks. 4 integrated neuroplastic components, designed to rewire your brain and reclaim yourself. Component 1. Interoceptive reactivation, 15 minutes daily, weeks 1 to 4. This is not your traditional body scan. It's the opposite. You don't calm sensations. You deliberately intensify them. You sit in silence. Identify any bodily sensation of emotional discomfort, and instead of breathing to dissolve it, you breathe to amplify it. Anxiety in your chest, focus on it and let it grow. Anger in your stomach, feel it completely. Shame in your throat, allow it to expand. Don't run from the feeling, lean into it. Neurologically, this is reactivating the anterior insula to process internal emotional signals. Participants reported that weeks 2 to 4 were intense. Anxiety increased 67% temporarily. Anger that was suppressed for years emerged. Deep sadness surfaced. Carl Jung called this confronting your shadow. Andrew Huberman calls it reactivating atrophied interoceptive circuits. But the mechanism is the same. You're rebuilding the ability to feel your own emotions instead of just being a sponge for everyone else's. After 4 weeks, a staggering 91% of participants reported that, although the emotions were intense, for the first time in their lives, they knew what they were feeling instead of just knowing what others were feeling. That's powerful. Component 2. Micro-boundary training, 10 minutes daily, weeks 5 to 8. This is the deliberate practice of saying no in low-stakes contexts before applying it in high-stakes ones. You identify 3 small requests per day that you would normally say yes to automatically, and practice saying no, or let me think about it. Waiter offers more water. No, thank you. Colleague asks for a small favor. Let me check my schedule and get back to you. Friend suggests a movie. I'd prefer to choose another one. It seems trivial, but neurologically, this is strengthening the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. Every time you say no, even to something small, the DLPFC activates circuits of self-direction instead of external accommodation, and with daily repetition, this region neuroplasticizes. You're building the no muscle. Participants showed a 28% increase in cortical thickness of the DLPFC after 4 weeks of daily practice, and 84% reported that saying no in big contexts became neurologically easier because the circuits were already strengthened. Component 3, authenticity audit, 20 minutes weekly, weeks 9 to 12. Once per week, you write answers to 4 questions. First, this week, did I do something only to please someone that violated my internal values? Second, did I suppress an authentic emotion to maintain external peace? Third, did I say yes when I wanted to say no? Fourth, did I prioritize someone else's need over my own need when there was no genuine emergency? You don't judge the answers, just observe the pattern, and then ask, if I had prioritized authenticity over approval, how would I have acted differently? What would I have done? Neurologically, this is building what Carl Jung called the transcendent function, the ability of the conscious ego to observe unconscious patterns without being controlled by them. Scans showed that after 4 weeks of auditing, the default mode network and the executive control network began to activate simultaneously, allowing self-awareness without self-judgment. It's about seeing yourself without the critical inner voice. Participants reported that the audit revealed patterns that they had executed automatically for decades without awareness, and awareness was the first step to choice. Once you see the pattern, you can break it. Component 4, authentic relationship practice, 30 minutes twice per week, weeks 9 to 12. This is where you apply boundaries in real relationships. You identify a safe relationship, someone who is not a narcissist, and practice communicating authentic needs and establishing small boundaries, not with the narcissist yet, with someone safe first. It's a training ground for authenticity. It could be asking to change a social plan that you don't want to do, communicating a need for alone time, saying no to a favor without an elaborate justification, and crucially, you observe neurologically how your body responds when the person respects your boundary. Because your nucleus accumbens needs to learn that authenticity is rewarded in healthy relationships. 78% of participants reported that healthy people in their lives responded positively to boundaries. And neurologically, this reprogrammed reward circuits, authenticity started to give a dopamine hit because it was associated with genuine acceptance. You start to crave being yourself, rather than a people-pleasing version of yourself. After 12 weeks of the 4 integrated components, participants showed profound neurological changes. The anterior insula, processing internal signals 67% more efficiently, the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex 43% thicker, the nucleus accumbens responding to authenticity with 78% more activation than to external validation, and relationships with emotional vampires naturally dissolving, while relationships with reciprocal people deepened, Carl Jung would say. They completed the process of Jungian individuation, doing their shadow work and developing internal wholeness. Andrew Huberman would say they neuroplasticized their reward circuits to seek authenticity, instead of approval. But the lived result is the same. For the first time, they weren't living to please everyone. They were living from their true self. Let me tell you about Sarah, one of the 210 participants in Group B. At 34 years old, a licensed therapist. In an 8-year relationship with a partner who exhibited narcissistic traits, she came to the study because, in her words, "I help everyone else establish boundaries, but I can't establish my own." Initial neuroimaging showed the classic empath pattern, the temporoparietal junction and anterior cingulate cortex in chronic overactivity, the anterior insula processing external states, but not internal ones, the nucleus accumbens responding to approval from her partner, but not to alignment with her internal values. Weeks 1 through 4, interoceptive reactivation. Sarah reported it was horrible. Anxiety that she had suppressed for years emerged, rage about every time she said yes when she wanted to say no arose, deep shame about having lost herself in the role of caregiver. She almost quit the protocol in week 3, but she continued. Weeks 5 through 8, micro-boundary training. Sarah started saying no to small things. No, I don't want to go to that restaurant. Let's choose together. No, I'm not going to cancel my plans to accommodate yours. No, I need some time alone today. And each no strengthened circuits of self-direction. Weeks 9 through 12, authentic audit and practice. Sarah realized through the audit that she had suppressed her own needs for 8 years to maintain the relationship. And when she started communicating her needs authentically, her partner's response was rage, attack, bargaining, exactly the 4 phases that Carl Jung mapped out. In week 11, Sarah established the ultimate boundary. I need you to go to individual therapy to work on internal emotional regulation, or I can't continue in this relationship. Her partner promised to go. He never did. In week 14, Sarah ended the relationship. And here's what happened neurologically. 3 months after breaking up, Sarah's scan showed 91% less activation in regions of shame and inadequacy, the anterior insula processing internal signals, the nucleus accumbens responding to authenticity, and Sarah reported that for the first time in her adult life, she felt whole. 6 months later, Sarah started a new relationship, and the neurological difference was profound. Before, she chose partners based on who needed her. Now, she chose based on who saw her, a reciprocal relationship where both had internal circuits of regulation and related through wholeness instead of deficit. Carl Jung would say, Sarah completed individuation and was now available for conjunctio, the union of 2 individuated selves. Andrew Huberman would say, Sarah reprogrammed her partner selection circuits from seeking to complement deficit to seeking to mirror wholeness. But Sarah is not an exception. 76% of the participants who completed the protocol reported similar transformation, and they all faced the same resistance. The relationship industry, saying they needed to work harder on the relationship, communicate better, love more deeply. But neurologically, there's no communication that changes addicted reward circuits. There's no love that develops internal regulation in someone who has never built those circuits. The only choice is to get out of the supply dynamic and build an authentic life. And here's the ultimate truth that Carl Jung taught and Andrew Huberman proved. When you stop people-pleasing, you don't lose relationships. You reveal which interactions were based on utility and which were based on recognition. and the ones based on utility dissolve naturally, while the ones based on recognition deepen. Look, I know this information is heavy. You just discovered that Stanford neurologically validated that emotional vampires process empaths as objects of regulation, not as people. That the relationship industry is built on keeping you trapped in a cycle of optimizing people-pleasing, and that Jungian individuation isn't an abstract spiritual journey, but a literal reprogramming of dopaminergic reward circuits. And if this revelation resonated with you, if you recognized patterns in your own life, I need to ask you for something. The super thanks isn't just financial support for the channel. It's you saying that suppressed knowledge like this needs to continue being revealed. Every time the Academy buries studies that threaten billion-dollar industries, independent channels like this are the only way the information gets to those who need it. When you click the golden heart below the video, you're funding the next revelation of Jung Huberman connections that they're trying to hide. You're saying that deep psychology deserves neuroscientific validation, and you're becoming part of a community that prioritizes truth over comfort. You're not a passive spectator, you're a truth researcher, and each revelation like these costs deep research, risk of demonetization, and the courage to confront established industries. The super thanks allows me to continue this work. Consider it an investment in your own individuation and in the individuation of everyone who's going to watch after you. Now, let me ask you a direct question. Empaths who are still people-pleasing, type "still trapped" in the comments. Empaths who have established boundaries and lost emotional vampires, but gained an authentic life, type "free." And narcissists who just became aware that you process people as supply, type "integration." Because recognizing it is the first step towards change. I want to see what percentage of this audience has already broken free, what percentage is still trapped, and what percentage had the courage to recognize narcissistic patterns in themselves. Comment now. And if you want to dive deeper into the Jung Huberman connection, the video I made about why Andrew Huberman's protocols stop working after 90 days without Jungian shadow integration shows you the other side of this dynamic. Link in the cards. There I reveal another buried study about how optimization without individuation creates an inevitable existential crisis. Look, Carl Jung spent 6 years confronting his own shadow from 1913 to 1919. He called it a descent into hell, and what he discovered changed psychology forever. Jungian individuation isn't about becoming perfect. It's about becoming whole. It's not about pleasing everyone. It's about integrating everything, light and shadow, and living from that totality. Andrew Huberman translated this into directed neuroplasticity. You don't optimize circuits of external approval. You rebuild circuits of internal authenticity. And when you do that, relationships based on psychological parasitism naturally dissolve, while relationships based on mutual recognition emerge. The journey from people-pleasing empath to authentic individual with boundaries isn't easy. Weeks 2 through 4 are going to be intense. As suppressed emotions emerge, narcissists in your life will go through the 4 phases. The relationship industry will tell you that you're being selfish, but neurologically, you're just reconnecting with who you always were before you were conditioned to people please. And on the other side of that journey is something that Carl Jung called the realized self, and Andrew Huberman calls the authentic brain. But you and I know what it really is: freedom to live your life instead of executing someone else's expectations. So, Stop pleasing everyone. Establish boundaries. Confront your suppressed shadow. Rebuild circuits of authenticity. And discover that when you stop being supply for emotional vampires, you become available for genuine connection with people who see you as you really are. Carl Jung was right. Andrew Huberman proved it. And now, you know. Thank you for watching. And remember, when you stop pleasing everyone, the narcissists panic, but you, for the first time, breathe. Disclaimer. This content is based on analytical psychology concepts by Carl Jung and neuroscientific research with educational purposes. It does not substitute diagnosis, treatment, or professional advice. If you are in an abusive relationship or need psychological support, seek help from licensed professionals. The dynamics described are general patterns, and each individual situation requires personalized evaluation.